J. Warner Wallace is a cold case homicide detective who's been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Dateline, and Court TV. Now, we join him as he applies his investigative skills to making a case for Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at Cold Case Christianity. I'm J. Warner Wallace. I want to talk tonight about 3 ways that social media has changed our priorities. And this is true probably of any technology over time. Let's face it, we are usually changed by the kinds of new technology that appear on the horizon. Let's face it, we were probably much more regional, much more geographically located before the arrival of automobile transportation. That transportation changed our sense of mobility around the country. It changed the nature of cities. If you look at the cities that were constructed on the East Coast before the invention of the automobile, they're all vertical cities, right, with mass transit. You get to California, we have one of those cities called San Francisco. That's a pre-car city, but Los Angeles is post-car. And that car, the invention of the automobile, it meant that we didn't have to be tightly aligned in high-rise buildings with close to all the same amenities connected by rapid transit. Instead, we could be all across the county and we could just drive where we needed to go. So suddenly cities became much more horizontal and much less vertical. What's happening here? Well, the way we live, how we think has been changed by technology. This happens for every generation. And it's happened for people in the social media generation and the internet generation. So what I want to talk about today are basically 3 ways that social media, as an advance of technology, has changed our priorities, how we see things. And I want to try to add along with that a couple of predictions, maybe a prediction based on each way that it has changed. And I'm just going to, for the most part, talk about this in generalities, but I think you're going to recognize some of the same things that I see. Sometimes I worry, at my age, am I just like the old man who's standing on his front grass and screaming, get off my lawn? Like I'm resistant to change or resistant to adaptation, or am I just complaining about wishing things being the way they used to be? And I don't think that's it. I'm just trying to be a good observer of culture to see what are the shifts I'm seeing and how are some of these shifts either caused by or exacerbated by social media. Now, before I start, let me tell you why I think there's two different forms of autonomy, which I've talked about on our podcast in the past. I've talked about it in our YouTube page in the past. 2 different kinds of autonomy that I think have escalated the shift in priorities. That these are the catalysts. These have ignited this shift. The first kind of autonomy is informational autonomy. And what I mean by informational autonomy is that we are now in a culture where young people don't have to practice any level of patience or groupthink about anything, even in the way they consume information. You now can find information from whatever angle of the world you already hold. We are much more tribal than ever before. There are now social media platforms and informational platforms and news platforms from the left and on the right. And if you hold one of these 2 positions, you can find yourself and create for yourself an echo chamber from all of the choices you have online. Social media provides us with access to all, because let's face it, most social media just points us to other websites and other groups, and we can find a way to affiliate ourselves with people who are just like us. And we don't have to, for example, when I was young growing up, you only had 3 major news sources if you wanted to watch network TV. And you found yourself embracing one of those 3 sources of information. But now I can find a plethora of information sources that can give it to me from whatever peculiar angle I view the world. I have autonomy. I'm not dependent on just a few choices. I have a smorgasbord of choices, which means I can really craft and personalize the kind of information that I consume. And as I do this, social media algorithms will continue to feed me like-minded articles and videos to keep me on the platform. And I'll start chasing those clicks, and we've seen what happens when that starts to occur, right? We just drill down deeper into our ideological wormholes, because let's face it, the algorithms are encouraging us to connect with similar news sources. It's not just information like news, it's also any kind of entertainment media. I mean, we select out what we like. I don't have to wait till next Thursday at 8 to watch the next Star Trek show or episode, like we did in the 60s and 70s. I can binge watch the entire season if I want to, when I want to, how I want to. I can skip certain things. I can watch it whenever I want. I have the autonomy to be able to control my information intake and my media intake. I can play God with all of that. You don't think that's going to have an effect on people? I don't have to submit anymore to even what everyone else likes. I can carve for myself an experience of the world, which is very individualistic. I can watch what I want to watch, when I want to watch, where I want to watch it, and suddenly I'm like this little island, and we are all now pocket islands. Have you ever been on a plane? You know, it used to be, believe it or not, they would have like 3 or 4 screens that would drop down. You would watch a movie on, so it wasn't even near your seat, and you were all watching the same movie. Who does that anymore? No, now we've each either got our own personal device in our hands or our own screen in the back of the seat. We're all watching. We are autonomous. We have the power to select what we want to watch on demand. It changes the way we think. Of course it would. But it's not just informational autonomy. It's also moral autonomy. If you realize that most people, when surveyed, believe that morals are a matter of personal opinion. That we each have a variety of views on any moral claim, on any moral truth claim, and that those are grounded and really made valid by your own subjective opinion. When you are morally autonomous, you don't bend your knee to what other groups or even groups of individuals or groups of subjects might say. It's how you feel. It's how you see the world morally that matters. Everyone else, just that's their opinion, but that's your truth, your moral truth. This is my moral truth. Sexual behavior, identity, who I am, how I behave, that's all a matter of what makes me feel good. My feelings and my own personal sense of what is right and wrong has been elevated in a world, of course, that social media amplifies. That's a message, by the way. Do what makes you feel good. You be you, girl. That's something you see. You be you, guy. That stuff, we see this all the time now, right? You just be you. You don't have to conform to any other view other than your view for who you ought to be. But look, I grew up in a culture, I don't want to say that. I hate to go back to saying when I was a kid. But the truth of it is, for a lot of older Americans, older people on the world, we were taught to conform to another idea of what it was to be a man, to be a certain kind of football player, to be whatever it may be. There were objective kind of templates for who we ought to be in these categories, and you didn't get to decide for yourself. If you wanted to be part of that, you had to assume that identity. Well, now we bring our own identity to the game, and we don't have to change it, and we're being told that we shouldn't change it, and that everyone should accept whatever it is we bring to the game, even our moral claims. This is an interesting world we're coming into, and social media amplifies these two forms of autonomy. As a result, I think there are 3 things that are changing. Shifts in our perspective of the world, shifts in our priority. So let me give you, before the first break, the first shift that I see in our priorities. And that is this shift from transcendent righteousness to personal morality. Transcendent righteousness to personal morality. And then I think we see this shift away from, and by the way, if you hold a transcendent worldview, which is really almost any religious worldview, is transcendent. In other words, it makes a series of claims that are said to transcend all believers within the group. There's an objective truth that's offered by the system, by the teaching of the religious worldview, that all members of the religious worldview are told they must embrace if you want to be part of that group. I wonder about the future of groups like that offer transcendent claims related to righteousness in a world in which all of us are having our personal views of morality amplified by social media. We are all have our identities. You have your so-and-so on Instagram, or your so-and-so on Twitter, and each of us has got our own social media identity, our own view of the world that we bring to the table, and we are now a smorgasbord of ideas, of moral ideas. And then along comes somebody who says Christianity is true, or Islam is true, or any worldview that makes claims in which all of us must adopt this moral claim in order to identify ourselves with that group. I think that's going to be a tough sell going forward. Those religious views, however, that are general, that offer you the opportunity to anything you believe is okay, that are more universal in nature, those will be on the rise. But I don't even know why you would bother to adopt those. You can believe whatever you want to believe without having to join any religious group. So in the end, I do wonder what the future is. If I had to predict right now, any worldview that requires people to surrender their personal view of morality to adopt a transcendent, objective view that's owned by the group, I think will struggle going forward in a world in which social media is amplifying personal moral identity. And it is. I mean, we celebrate who we are in visual platforms like Instagram and TikTok, where we are out there saying, I see so many TikTok videos and also newsfeed videos and stories and reels on Instagram where people are just pontificating about their philosophical views. Everyone's got a philosophical view. Everyone's now a wise sage. Everyone's a source of moral truth and of personal truth. Objective claims that transcend all of us seem to be harder to come by. And I think social media just makes that harder. So I would say the first difference is that we now are shifting from a transcendent righteousness, a view of transcendent righteousness, to a view of kind of personal morality that really depends on who you are, and who am I to tell you that you ought to accept my view or any other transcendent view of morality when you're as much a person as anybody else. So therefore, I think going forward, you're going to see that those transcendent systems are going to shrink because we have an elevated view of self. And social media just continues to elevate our view of self. Let's take a break and come back. I'll give you two more ways I think that our priorities are shifting because of social media. Coming this fall, join me, J. Warner Wallace, on a 10-part journey based on my book, Person of Interest. We'll investigate a real homicide together, and we'll also examine the unparalleled impact Jesus had on human history. We'll trace the fuse that burned toward the disappearance of Tammy Hayes, then sift through the fallout that eventually implicated her husband. In a similar way, we'll examine the historical views that burned toward the appearance of Jesus and marvel at the fallout and unexpected impact Jesus had on our world. Finally, we'll ask the critical question, does Jesus still matter in a world that's increasingly skeptical of the Bible? Let's discover if Jesus is history's true person of interest. Let me give you a second way that I think our priorities are shifting because of social media. Social media is particularly enabling this change in our view. And that is that we are moving from objective truth to personal belief. It's not just about moral claims, about what is true in terms of moral behaviors. It's what is true about anything. I mean, have you struggled with this, like I have struggled with this? I mean, are there any neutral news, were there ever any neutral news providers? Probably not. But it seems like it's even more exacerbated. Like I have to figure out like which, and I've gotten to the point where, if I'm honest with you, I don't think I trust anyone anymore. I have watched those people who I probably would, I can say, well, look, on this side, this particular news source, I have a tendency to personally agree with that person 95% of the time. But there's lots of times when he'll say something or she'll say something and I'll think to myself, that's actually an exaggeration. That's not, even though I agree with generally the worldview that this news source provides, I don't agree with that spin on it because that seems like that's really either politically motivated or whatever. And this is happening, of course, on both sides. And so we are at the place right now where every side could point to the other side and say that's fake news. And why is that happening? Well, because social media has only amplified this. Look, it used to be that if you hold a distrusting view of a news agency, you really didn't have a place in which you could argue about it, except for maybe the op-ed page or letters to the editor in the Times or whatever it may be. There were very few places in which you could actively voice your resistance. But now, everyone's got a chance to tweet this, to respond to this, and I see people on news channels, on news agencies, and even on internet news sources who will respond to the tweet of a guy who's got 300 followers. So all of us have an elevated voice in a marketplace of ideas that is just moving. And so now it's like, well, okay, you've got your view, I've got my view. I don't trust your view, you don't trust my view. And by the way, we have elevated our personal views about truth beyond it. Like, who do we trust? Who's a reliable authority anymore? Who's the trusted authority anymore? I mean, I don't even expect myself to be a trusted authority. Everything's going to get tested. I think you should test things. But we're in a social media world which has just deteriorated our trust in any news agency, any source of information. And because it has deteriorated and eroded that trust, I think it's going to be harder to move us. Why do you think we're in a situation right now where it's like, I'm not even sure, like, I suspect that if one political side is in favor of vaccinations, I guarantee you that many people on the other side will be against vaccinations based on any science or anything like that, just based on politics. And it would switch. It would be just the opposite if the other side was in power. Then all of that side would be saying, well, you ought to get vaccinated. And the other side would be saying, well, no, we've already seen that, right, in this election cycle. Because truth is so malleable that you don't know who to trust. Would you trust the CDC? Maybe. But a lot of people don't. And what's going on there? Why is that happening? Well, because social media has made us so tribal. Why do we even call it social media? You know, it's really just, you know, it's on social media. We just dug deeper grooves in our tribalism, and social media has made us incredibly tribal. Remember, the fact that we do not really know who it is we're talking to on social media has only exacerbated the problem. I've said it so many times that if we required people to put their home address and the picture of their family up there instead of the fake picture and, you know, some ridiculous name for their moniker, for their handle, we'd see a different behavior. You would never treat your next door neighbor the way you're willing to treat people on social media. And a lot of this is an argument over what is true and trustworthy in terms of news. So it's not just that I've got a moral view of sexuality, a moral view related to marriage, or a moral view related to identity or the right to life or any of that stuff. It's really now also gone so far as to say, I'm not even sure I can trust your statistics. If you're going to try to make a statistical argument, well, I don't trust your source. I don't trust it. And so now we're at a point where really our feelings, it's really we're basking in our feelings, not in what is true, not in a case I could even make. As a matter of fact, I don't even want to hear the facts. I'm so caught up in my feelings that facts don't matter anymore. When, of course, that facts matter about everything, folks. I mean, if I don't have the facts right about how to render this video, I can't even put it online. My feelings don't have anything to do with it. There are certain ways, certain truths about how technology works, about how your car engine runs, about how the transportation system in your city works, that your feelings are not going to change the way those things work. The facts are the facts, your feelings are your feelings. Don't confuse the two. But we're at a place right now where it seems like we are elevating personal beliefs and feelings are far more, if it makes me feel bad, I'm probably going to deny it as a truth source. And if that's the case, then you know that the future prediction is that any argument that is going to try to be made on the basis of facts will probably not win over those arguments that just come from a perspective of feelings. You know, this is why we say if one person dies, you know, if we save just one life, well, if we want to save just one life, let's all stop driving, because we can save a lot of lives if we just stop driving. But it feels good to say, yes, I would not want to be responsible for someone's death. So because it's rhetorically powerful on the basis of feelings, we move on it, even though factually it doesn't make much sense, right? Because there's a lot of good that you do by getting in your car that can actually save lives. But there's a risk that you might cost a life. And we always weigh those kinds of, but that's an argument from facts. That's an argument from data. But we're in a world right now where, you know, objective truth and facts is not as important as subjective beliefs and feelings. That's another way that I think social media has changed the way we see things. Because social media amplifies feelings, right? Who's going to read 280 characters of data? No, actually, I can be much more rhetorically powerful saying something emotive, something that is based in my feelings. That is going to generate a response much faster than your data points. So I think that's one of the ways that social media has changed our priorities. Let's come back and give you the last way that I think is even probably the most important way that social media is changing our perspective. Do you get a sense that censorship is rising? If we simply just reiterate the teaching of Jesus of Nazareth, there's a good chance someone in the culture is going to see that as intolerant. I'm J. Warner Wallace, cold case detective and Christian casemaker. If your concern is like I am about being deplatformed, about being canceled by a culture that has control over your mechanisms to interact with each other, and that's what it is with social media, then please join us at a private community we are building at coldcasechristianity.com. And I want you to join us if you're interested in being mentored, in being discipled in a way that will help you become a better Christian casemaker. It's a platform where you can know, is the Bible true and does it matter? Those two things will change your life. Join us at coldcasechristianity.com. You won't regret it. Okay, a third way that social media is changing our priorities and our perspectives, and that is this. It's kind of, if you think about it, you've seen it already a number of times play out in the sports community, and that is that we are moving from a collective aspirations of a group toward the personal brands of individuals. Those are far more important than whatever your collective. It used to be that, hey, you see this in team sports, right? Anything for the team. You just do it for the team. You do it for the team. And now what we've kind of said is, and it kind of started, you see it in basketball, for example, where personal brands are more important than, look, if it would make my brand better for us to win a championship, then I'm all about winning the championship. But if I can still build my brand without having to win a championship, I really don't care about the championship. I only care about the collective aspirations of all of us if they happen to advance my own personal ambitions, my personal brands. And that, I think, happens in social media, because social media is all about personal brands. What do you post? It's a reflection of who you are. I mean, Instagram has really amplified this. How many times do you see people who have presented a side of themselves to the world on social media that isn't even true, but you wouldn't know? And then we have other young people who are depressed by the fact they cannot measure up to this false image that their friends are posting, because there are social media influencers. What is that? It's somebody who's developed a brand based on what? Nothing. Based on just being popular on social media. So we have moved from, what is for the good of a group, which means I might become invisible, be a team player. Oh, a team player. Just that expression, be a team player. Is that still used? I think you're seeing all professional sports are moving from the idea of the team having more control to the idea of the player having more control, which makes sense, right? Because now you've got players whose brands online are actually sometimes bigger than the team they play for. They might have more followers than the team they play for. They might have more interaction than the team they play for. And they can leverage that interaction on social media to get what they want, to leave a team early, to break out of a contract, to be able to do what they want to do. And you'll see this is a shift that's taking place in culture largely because of social media. It might be the most fueled by social media of any of these shifts in priorities. And so what I see is that I don't think we understand. Look, let's predict this going forward. If this is true, then any worldview that calls us to deny ourselves for some greater good is probably going to be less and less popular, right? To a culture who doesn't even understand what that would even look like. Because they're not willing to deny themselves for a greater good unless that greater good builds their brand, in which case it's not about a greater good, it's about them again. And there's the problem, is I think that we are at a place right now where social media is shifting us from the collective aspirations and the goals of the group to the goals and the fame and celebrity and notoriety of the individual. And one thing that I worry about the most about social media, and you've heard me talk about it here before, is just that we are moving toward celebrity, and everyone's got celebrity. You probably look, you're talking to somebody, or you're listening to somebody. If it's not me, it's somebody else on social media, it's somebody else on YouTube, who is a talking head like me, who's pontificating about any topic, and you hope that that person is going to provide you with some insight. And that person has become, you're listening to that person. This is why you'll see on our thumbnails, I have removed all the pictures of Jimmy and I from our thumbnails on YouTube, trying to remove them all from our headers on social media. I still think we should have a picture of us on the social media so you know who it is you're talking to. But I don't want to pretend like I'm advancing the brand of a person. And maybe that's just me at 60 now, thinking, hey, you know what? It's time to step away and become more and more invisible, so the stuff we're talking about becomes more and more visible. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit hesitant sometimes about social media like YouTube, where it is all about I got to be on camera to do this. I wish they were all animated, right? Where like the Dennis Prager videos, or some way like we do on What Would You Say videos. I've got now a couple of those up at the Colson Center here on YouTube. So take a look at YouTube. You can see the Colson Center videos. But those are nice because you don't have to always be in front of the camera. It can be about your ideas and not be about you. But social media amplifies the you. And people will tell you, well, if you want to grow your social media platform, you actually need to advance you as a brand, because you are the brand. Well, this idea of shifting from the collective ambitions of groups to the private aspirations, the private ambitions and personal brands of individuals, I think is so myopic that it's going to be hard. By the way, all three of these moves, from transcendent righteousness toward personal morality, from objective truth to personal belief, from collective aspirations to personal branding, are a challenge for those of us who believe that God exists and is calling us to something in community outside of ourselves. Something that is transcendently true, objectively true, that offers a sense of transcendent righteousness, and that really is about the benefit of the collective aspirations of a group, of a community, of loving others as you love yourself, loving others as you want them to love you, of moving outside your own skin toward the empathy and love of others. Oh my gosh. All three of these shifts in priorities that are amplified by social media also contribute to the shrinking of religious worldviews everywhere, because they are amplifying the love of self and they are minimizing the love of anybody else. So just know this is something we're going to have to challenge ourselves and call ourselves out and raise up children in the next generation who know the difference. And I hope that kind of helps you to think about what you're going to do going forward with your own kids. I'm going to just take a gratuitous moment here at the end, because we have a few weeks here left. We're trying to build our launch team for Person of Interest. I love writing books because I can step back and I don't have to be the source of information on the book. It's the content of the book that I'm so hopeful people will read, because it's all about Jesus of Nazareth and his impact on history. Here's a short video that shows you about our launch team. Take a look at it. Pretty easy to get started. You'll see a link on our YouTube page, for example, in the header. You'll just hit that link. It'll bring you right to our launch team page. Please join our launch team and help get the word out about Jesus and how he has changed the world, because it turns out that he is calling us away from all of those three things that social media has called us toward. He is calling us toward a transcendent view of righteousness that comes from God, an objective truth about the nature of reality and the nature of God, and about a collective aspiration of what the family of God can do and be. And if we want to move away, we're going to have to return to the teaching of Jesus. Hope that helps you here this week, and I'll see you next week at Cold Case Christianity.
To hear more from J. Warner Wallace, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For more information on this week's topic, visit youtube.com/coldcasechristianity with J. Warner Wallace. Thank you for joining us on this Cold Case Christianity broadcast.